Hello, welcome back. Welcome to our new lecture together. Hoping you're doing great. Everything is doing very well with you. Your preparation for the finals, extra and extra. As you know, we are finalizing our lectures together. So I'd love to do that. I'm ready to answer any questions if you read the PowerPoint. If you have any other comments or questions, please let me know, and I'll be there always to answer your questions. Okay, let's start our lecture together. If you still remember, last lecture we started to talk about civil society, and we determined why we already talked about this topic. And we said that this is part of the political system nowadays, and we cannot talk about any political system without talking about the civil society and the interference and the role, the function of civil society organizations and structure inside the countries and in the international system as whole. While the previous lecture was only surveying or orientation for the term, in today's lecture, we're going to talk about the historical track for this term, the relation between certain thinkers and the term. Then we're going to concentrate on the functions of civil society and nowadays political system. Actually, the term of civil society has become very common around the world today, as we said. And the concept of civil society is increasingly complicated and increasingly announced everywhere. Not only in politics, but also for media, for economic, for culture, etc. So it is not the interest of politicians, it's also the interest of many scientists as well, who in recent years try to use common concepts to explain the function and the need for the structure. Being confronted with the term civil society, some people perhaps have a huge idea of the term in general, but in a way it's still ambiguous. Even if it's had been used in a large around the world, the concept itself is a little bit ambiguous and not clear, blurred in a way. It's one of the terms that being used in a large-listic way, if you want to say it. It's largely in the whole world, as well as globalization, civilization, clash, and so on and so on. That's why it still needs to investigate more about not the meaning as a meaning, but the need for the structure, the reasons behind these structures, the area that contain each definition. For example, like as we said with all the previous terms in political science, each term was born because of certain political, economic, and social circumstances, and it's the same situation with civil society. So but the most critical question here is the role that civil society is playing in contrast of the political regime and inside the political life in each country and in the international system as whole. So it is not about the term, it is also about the relation with other components of the political system. So let's remember a few things together that could help to make things much easier and more clear for all of us. The concept of civil society is not new at all, as we mentioned in the last lecture. It's originated in the ancient Greek, like more than 2,000 years before the modern era. The famous philosopher Aristotle pointed to the name Koinonia Politic, which means citizen society, and later on it's called Ciutas Civiles. At that time, men and only men, whom was very considered as citizens, except women, of course, and slaves, tried to take an action in the government or against the government of their polity, better than assembling wealth and diverting themselves. The term, in that sense, was not clear, but in a way, it was a shadow of civil society, if you want to call it a shadow. The nice interesting thing that the term civil society was occasionally used throughout European history. Uh, it was used in several contexts, but it wasn't reflecting the entire idea as nowadays. It gained more emphasis actually in the 18th century, but the idea of civil society conceived as a sphere of action to differentiate the states and born during the Enlightenment, which we talked about previously, and 17th and 18th centuries, and acquired its modern characteristics due to authors such as Locke, Charles Montesquieu, and others. It dealt with the society in which humans live together in community, where citizens who are entitled as citizens allowed to speak. They should thus be free and independent, enjoying the rights of associations, cooperation, deciding the most important issues in the debate. They must also be able to achieve coexistence characterized by tolerance and social equality and full respect of law, but not too much pressure exerted by the state. And this is one of the most interesting background that could help to understand the roots of civil society. According to John Locke, it was the duty of the state to guarantee citizens equality before the law, actually, and before the idea of integrity, freedom, property, etc. If it doesn't comply with this principle, citizens had the right under the corporate citizen to rebel. On the other hand, Charles de Montesquieu articulated or argued much less civic society role of the state than we can see with Locke. We can also point to another idea that Montesquieu showed as intermediate between citizens and the state. In his opinion, there were two spheres to differentiate between: policy on one hand and the civil society on the other. We have many other thinkers who were discussing these concepts and these ideas, but the problem is that each philosopher or thinker used to reflect the concept from his own point of view, from his own background. Alexis, for example, later considered the civil society as place of birth and year of civic virtues such as participation. For him, it was the school of democracy and freedom. With this idea, the company or the civil became increasingly a public political body who watched and criticized the action of the state. From another perspective, the philosopher George Hegel too had his own interpretation of the concept of civil society. According to him, the concept was designed or introducing a separate area outside the sphere of national construction of the community, or let's say the natural family, and the sphere of higher level of the state. Citizens can, as individuals, according to him, pursue their interests legitimately as individuals. In this first place, their economic interest was targeted, and they were supposed to resolve their disputes and, to some extent, regulate their affairs. The civil society played the role in the structure of solving the problems of interest and intermediate between individuals and the state. It was generally through that in ancient societies, men, and as we said, men only, were always fighting and harming each other due to the food, women, properties, etc. It was thought that savages had no forms of social organization, where interacting with the other was negatively and implemented in a violent way. Being part of civil society, on the other hand, meant that you interact with other human beings in more complex way, that you don't normally commit violence against other members in the community. So in that era, they were seeing the civil society as a solution for the violence in a way or another. They were trying to find a solution for the nature of relations that maybe or could be very violent. And because, as we said, in that era, people were more towards the natural pattern, and they were trying to explain human attitudes and behaviors more as or based on the philosophical background, which means they saw human as bad mannered creatures, and the existence of the state will facilitate the relation between these creatures. But again, that wasn't the normal situation, because in a way or another, the state wasn't the good solution. So according to this, civil society was the way to transfer the structure into something more peaceful, if we can say that in this manner. Okay. So after all what we discussed about the historical background and the historical appraise of this concept and term, it was always there the question of what is civil society? Where can we describe this structure or this body in much better way? Actually, the term civil society is very increasingly fashionable. All those who speak don't define the concept in the same track, and this was the most interesting point. Like, as we mentioned before, each thinker or philosopher tried to put his or their contributions upon their context, upon their backgrounds. That's why we couldn't have a precise definition till a very late time. But what precisely doesn't facilitate the definition was it is in a way contrasting each other. Certain ideas are not matching in a good way and doesn't offer good understanding for the core elements of civil society. And this forced anyone that you want to study civil society to shed light on the many definitions and concepts that can sometimes be very contradictory, as we said. Civil society can be defined through two fronts, actually. Civil society is regarded as an area within the company which is merged between the sphere of state, economic and private, or between state, market, and family. This area is considered a public space, consists by many groups or more or less independent of the state, more or less organized, with different forms of organization such as initiative groups, clubs, associations, etc. It is important to understand that the civil society which we are talking here is still not a homogeneous group in any form that could be represented by a voice. Furthermore, it's not a mass of individual citizens who represent their interests individually. People come together rather freely according to their interests or their personal and certain goals and careers. And clubs, associations, social movements to trade and work together towards common goals. Actually, the route to establish certain gathering for the civil society was the concern of many thinkers in that time. Um, the core requirements for a civil society as organized is guarantee of individual and collective freedoms to individuals, or let's say it's the right to assemble and the right to associate and to build units, parties, etc., etc. This is the only opportunity to represent their interests, actually. Um, Space society where this happens is called civil society. Generally, civil society organizations are independent. Contrary to economic organizations, they don't pursue any objective of a profit, for example. They act beyond individual and family private sphere and seek to attract the attention of society and create social impacts in public life. So, according to this definition, we should concentrate that it's not about who formed this, but they were trying in a further limit to see why they do go for that option. Why do we need civil society in the first place? They follow and analyzing this idea that citizens can act beyond individuals and beyond the individual interest to form something bigger. They exceed the family private sphere and seek to attract the society as a whole to make different identity, if you want. Such as a society is born when decisions are taken and established by the hands of others directly involved. The objectives are always concern articulated the public affairs actors. Civil society is still involved, according to that definition, with politics. It doesn't set functions with the states, but they prefer to keep an independent position. Similarly, groups that pursue objectives exclusively in a private way, like families, small business, etc., etc., they don't belong to civil society, like, for example, political parties, parliaments, or state governments, or any affiliates that follow the government in a way or another. In this slide, we were talking about the historical track, how thinkers try to establish the structure of political science in a way or another. After all the previous discussion about the historical background, how scholars, thinkers try to analyze the basic of civil society, how they started to understand and to study civil society based on actors, based on function, based on reasons to establish, etc., etc. We can reach to the point that after all that ambiguity and contradictory and definitions, etc., we can say that civil society means development. It means new tracks of positions, functions, actors, new levels of interaction, formulas, equations, and new structures, socially, economic, and political. The term nowadays, it's more linked with democracy, with the human rights, democratization, the terms of new political regime systems, etc. In the same context, the concept of society, citizens, is often used in the same direction with democracy and community development. The term, in a little bit, started to be a shadow to the track of democratic enhancement inside communities. Based on all that historical background, and the entire tracking for the definitions and the studying, we can maybe put a common structure for this to say it is a parallel level in political science to create a new authority if all traditional political thinkers were thinking that we only have three authorities like executive, legislative, and the third authority, which is judicial. They were thinking that civil society will be a new authority, not only inside the communities, but also across regions. It could be regional or even international authority would affect the track of all political regimes nowadays. Okay, to sum up and summarize the entire concepts that we've been talking in the previous part, tracking the historical track progress, they dealt with the concept roots, reasons why we do need and why we do have civil society till the nowadays existence. We might end up with certain points, or at least certain elements could form the identity of civil society as general. And this identity could have the following features. Number one, we could say that civil society is a public space inside the community or the society. And it could start inside the society, actually, it could be inside the international society as a whole. Number two, it's a body between state, market, and family. As we said before, it is based on the interests of people who start this establishment or this body or this structure. So it's not part of the family, it's not part of the market, it's not part of the society. It could be intermediate among all of these, either have all of them or work in parallel level with all of them. Number three, it is not a homogeneous group. It shouldn't have like an ethnic background or a common identity. Like a national identity, or they shouldn't have the same religion, etc., etc. But in the same sense, it's not a mass of people isolated from each others. The idea of establishing civil society is to have common goals, common plan, common interest to achieve. Number four, it means gatherings of citizens according to their respective and perspective and their interests, their perspective of issues, cases, problems, blah, 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 trying to achieve certain common goals through certain agreed tools. So again, if they don't have a common identity, so definitely they should be something common between all these citizens. And till this level, they were talking about citizens, but actually later on we could talk about civil society, a group of organizations, a group of associations. But even these organizations and associations, they should be started upon someone's vision. So the word vision started to be one of the most important terms inside the literature, which describes civil society as one of the important components inside the political regime nowadays. If the previous elements were the common features of civil society, so let's agree that after forming the structure, the organizations or the outcome of the structure must have certain characteristics. These characteristics might be as following, or these organizations could be the following. Number one, they are independent, separated from the state, whether economically or in the structure. These organizations are not part of the governmental structure. They might need to have certain permissions, certain license, etc., etc., but they are independently organized away from the authority of the government. Number two, they shouldn't work for profit. As we said before, the core theme of these organizations is not business. It's not to gain money. Number three, they should try to attract attention to others' interests, cases, problems. It's not only, if it came to your head, it's not only charity, but it could be developmental. It could be to raise the voice of disabled, to raise the voice of women, to raise the voice of poor people, marginalized, vulnerable, etc., etc. So one of the most important characteristics of the functions of the organizations is to track the entire function of civil society, to spotlight on certain crucial problems and cases inside the community. Number four, it must have goals that serve the public affairs. As we mentioned in the previous points, the goals of these organizations should not be profit, should not be individual interest. It must serve the entire interest of the community. Number five, these organizations don't pursue state functions, but are only interested in participation independently and maybe forcing new policies or implementing certain policies to serve the general interest of the people. Number six, we can certainly understand much better by examining the various functions of the civil society as the sound of people, as the sound of those who are in need to support, or as the sound of the rights. Okay, let's stop here for this lecture, and all what I want you to understand from this lecture is that it wasn't easy at all, neither to accept the idea of civil society or even to analyze it, because as we said from the early beginning of explaining this concept or explaining the reasons, the roots, the actors, the function of it, it wasn't easy at all, and it wasn't acceptable neither by government, neither by the global structure, nor by people themselves. So let's stop here. Thank you for participating in this and watching the lecture. And at the coming lecture, we're going to concentrate on the functions, the core functions of civil society. Thanks a lot. Always be safe and see you soon. Thanks.